Hello, everyone. I hope everybody is having a wonderful day. Excited again to be here for another Kubefirst live, and this is another like special Kubefirst because we're having a guest again. Jim from the creator of Kyverno is with us today. So I think it's going to be an amazing show. But like before we jump right in, Jim, sorry, jump right in. Jim, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Fred. Thanks for having me and welcome everyone. So I'm Jim Bugwadia, co-founder at Nirmata and also one of the maintainers at Kyverno. Also in the community, I'm a co-chair in the policy working group. So glad to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for being with us. And it is not a live stream without the other Cube first person here. So John, for the people that don't know you, who are you?
Hey everybody, good to see you all. Thanks for tuning in. I'm John Dietz. I'm one of the co-founders of the Kubefirst project. Jim, pleasure to have you on the show today. Excited to talk about Kyverno. It got added to our GitOps catalog just kind of from community demand. I wasn't personally familiar with it, but we wanted to give it to our community through the catalog. I discovered it over the course of the last couple of weeks firsthand, and I'm in love with it. I'm so excited to talk about it. So let's get into it.
That's great. And I was going to introduce my cat who was that side who was like with us like seconds ago, but like when John started talking, my cat just went away. So yeah, my cat's not gonna join the live stream today. So yeah, we're gonna talk policies. A topic that for some is exciting, for some maybe not exciting, but like I think it should be. I think it's important. I think it's critical. So let's talk about it. And Jim, show us a little more, like talk to us a little bit about the product and why we should use it and why it's useful for people using Kubernetes.
Yeah, maybe just to kind of start with, why policy to begin with, right? Because it's not, I mean, let's face it, in the whole, infrastructure DevOps world, that's not the first thing we think about. But more and more, what we're seeing is it's almost becoming necessary for success and for scale. And if you think about it, I mean, every organization has policies, right? We deal with some form of policy governance in everything we do. And usually it means there's some, either bylaws or some contracts that you have put in place. But in our world, in Kubernetes and cloud native, policies are a digital contract, right? And what we all want to get to is this whole DevSecOps world where all teams are collaborating, working together on these shared systems, and policies become that enabler. They bring together these different teams. They, let you kind of, just again, like with other things in Kubernetes, in a declarative manner with Kyverno policies, you can kind of specify and you can collaborate on some of these, overall agreements that you have across teams, letting each team be autonomous and kind of move fast without breaking things.
Fred, we lost your microphone, buddy. I'm sure it was the smoothest segue, though. I do.
That was yeah, technology is hard. You have to mute, unmute, and like all those buttons, so complicated. So yeah, I was just like acknowledging what you just said, Jim. I think it's true. So now I'm sorry, I really want to jump like right into it. I want to learn more about Kyverno because John's the one who like prepared the demo and everything. So I'm a newbie. I don't know the project at all. I've seen the result that John showed me, and I'm pretty excited about it. But now I want to understand a little more the mechanism behind it and like how it's working. And again, like how has user or DevOps or like someone doing GitOps, like how can I use your product, like that product that is available for people.
Yeah, so I can kind of talk briefly about it, and John, if I believe you're going to show the demo as well. So Kyverno, of course, is a CNCF project. You can kind of download, install it either as a Helm chart or just through YAMLs. Typically, it is part of whatever installation system you're using, and it installs as an admission controller, right? So it runs right inside of your cluster, connects with the API server, self-registers to get admission requests. And for anything you change in your cluster, you basically will receive requests within Kyverno, which can then apply policies that you have configured also as Kubernetes resources to that, right? So that's a quick sort of view of how it works, but happy to dive in a little bit more. I think, John, you were going to show on your
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So just a couple minutes ago, we ran a K3D, which is our local version of the Kubefirst platform. Ran a K3D install, and for our audience that's familiar with Kubefirst already, this is kind of a familiar screen. It just kind of drops you in your terminal, gives you some output about how you can get to your tools. And
but don't get too attached to that screen,
that's
because
right.
like next version, you're gonna have like a even more beautiful CLI output. So yeah,
Very, very true. Very true. Yeah, and man, are we excited for our next release? But
we are.
let's not get into that. That'll get me all wound up. I'm so excited for the
Let's
next
go
one.
back to the topic for today.
Yeah, back to the point. Yeah. So when you do a Kubefirst install on the local environment, we have this Kubefirst dev domain that always resolves to your callback loop at 127.001. So that allows us to have like nice ingresses and nice, certificates and a nice rich browser experience. And when we this is the screen that most people will land on, but up here in the GitOps catalog, we have a handful of additional cloud native applications that our community has requested that you can add onto the Kubefirst platform after a provisioning process is complete.
And
So
John, this is a new catalog that we added like not too long ago, but it's open source. So if you go on github.com/kubefirst/gitops dash catalog, you can add any application that you feel is missing in the catalog. And if you don't want to do that, I understand. Just create an issue or let us know in the Slack community, and we're going to be more than happy to add what's missing or what you think is missing in the catalog.
Right on. Thank you, Fred. So here we can see the Kyverno. It's easy to find by just clicking security, and then you've got Kyverno right up top. And when you hit install here, basically what this is doing is, like Fred was describing up in our GitOps catalog, we have all of these applications that are all set up with GitOps, Argo CD, application. So we're installing the Kyverno policies, we're installing Kyverno itself, and the policy reporter are the three charts that we're going to install. Oh my goodness, sorry about that. So those are the three charts that we'll install when you add Kyverno through the GitOps catalog. This right here is my John Dietz GitOps repository that I installed the platform to. And you can see when you go to registry Kubefirst, most of these were created 16 minutes ago when I created the cluster, but this Kyverno just got added 1 minute ago. And that's how the GitOps catalog works. It's not very complicated. We have a community upstream. And if you want to use one of those tools, it's easy to add onto the Kubefirst platform. So really great for like demo environments and stuff like that. It's community driven. If you have applications that you want to be installable to multiple clouds with multiple Git providers in a production ready way, just get it on the GitOps catalog, tell people to use Kubefirst to install your product, and you'll be able to install basically anywhere. We got all these different clouds supported in local environments or whatever. But beyond that, let's not talk about Kubefirst. Let's talk about Kyverno itself. So at the conclusion of a Kubefirst K3D create execution, you're going to get this screen, and you'll by default be automatically connected to your new K3D cluster. So if I, K get nodes, we'll see that we have, these brand new 16-minute-old nodes. And if I K get namespaces, you can see that we've got Kyverno added just 2 minutes ago. So let's kubins into Kyverno and look at the services that get included, and you'll see that there's this policy reporter user interface. So if I keyport forward to that policy reporter and hop into my local host at 8080, you can also set this up with an ingress if you want to. So this is the result of just installing Kyverno to the Kubefirst platform on K3D. And this blew me away. I wasn't fully prepared for what, I didn't honestly know what I was going to see as a new user to the Kyverno ecosystem. But here you can see right off the bat that, well, it seems to be trying to tell me something about GitHub Runner. Seems to be trying to tell me something going on in Kubesystem that's out of policy. There's some fails. But if you look at the policy report, you can also see that it's been inspecting everything across the platform. So Vault, staging, development, production for the Metaphor example app that gets delivered, Cert Manager, et cetera. Just a whole bunch of information about all of the policies that get installed by default and how those policies results are when measuring those policies against the applications that are on the Kubefirst platform. So right off the bat, I was like, I saw this one up here. The Kubesystem ones were all coming back as issues with traffic, and traffic is installed with K3D. So I wasn't as interested in those, but this one here, we hand rolled the GitHub Runner creation. I was like, well, what would be wrong about our GitHub Runner implementation that would be out of policy? And here it was showing that the privilege mode is disallowed according to the default policy, which is a really good policy to have just as a blanket rule. You generally speaking don't want to have your pods running in privileged mode. And I got thinking about why we would have that in privileged mode. And it turned out it was because in the old days, Kubefirst used to be using Docker and Docker in order to run our containers and or in order to build our containers. We recently switched from Docker to Canico for container builds, and those don't need to run with escalated privileges. So we can turn this off. But this is the type of thing that, left to my own accord, we have, how many different pods to inspect and different policies to evaluate. To do something like that manually is just impossible. There's way too much going on. Once you get to a certain scale, you have to have something more automated to be able to present you with the metadata that you care about. And I just thought that it was a really neat way to give me super grokkable information about the namespace that has the problem, the specific pod that has the problem. So you can inspect that pod, see how it was created, see why it needs an escalated privilege, and then you can just adjust it, and then you're back within policy. And Jim, if I understand the world correctly, and forgive me because I'm not a very experienced Kyverno user yet, but I feel like the way that this is working is it's in like observability mode right now, and all it's doing is inspecting and reporting on the default policies. But I imagine once I fix this problem and I want this problem to go away permanently, I can just change some settings and have that be enforced. Can you sort of talk to us a little bit about like how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So what Kyverno is doing here is when you installed it by default, it did install as an admission controller, but Kyverno also runs background scans automatically. So anything already running in your cluster will be scanned. And few things. So the policies you also installed in the default chart are in audit mode, right? And that's the default setting. Okay. But it's very easy. And in fact, I'll show how you can flip them to enforce mode. And we'll see what happens if you then try and create either a bad pod or just try and run a workload off a public repo, which should not be allowed in a production cluster, right? Sure. So, and for those type of things, Kyverno will immediately block them and not allow them to run at all.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I know I'm going to have 1,000 follow-up questions, but this was really all I wanted to show about getting Kyverno onto the Kubefirst platform for our audience. I would love to shift the attention over to you and sort of give you an opportunity to showcase some of those features of Kyverno that I'm not particularly equipped to be able to demo. Would that be all right?
Yeah, let's dive in.
Yeah,
Awesome.
just before, let's say hi to Patrick, who is there every live stream. So thanks for joining us, Patrick. And as a reminder, once Jim is going to demo a little more the other capabilities of like Kyverno, if you have any question, let us know. We're going to be more than happy to answer the question, or actually Jim, because John and I know that we're a little bit limited about the platform. But I need to say, I'm really happy with the result with the default policies and the Kubefirst created cluster. I mean, like it means we're doing a not too bad jobs, because like there's not a lot of red here. It's mostly
no.
Awesome. So let's move to Jim's screen.
Yeah, so just to kind of go into a little bit more detail on what John showed. So Kyverno, out of if the default installation, it will run about 4 different controllers, and in addition, you can add the policy reporter, etc. Right? So, but the Kyverno installation itself, the primary controller is an admission controller, which receives API requests based on your configured policy set. So the interesting thing here is you don't have to manually set up or manage webhooks. Kyverno automates all of that. It also creates a self-signed certificate for secure communication with the API server. So just the default install takes care of a lot of things, which otherwise with admission controllers are fairly complex and fairly hard to get right. Once that happens, once you have your Kyverno up and running, any API request that comes in, which matches first of all what's configured in the admission webhook, will then be forwarded, and then Kyverno will apply policies on it, pass back the results, which could be either enforce, audit, etc. Right? So that's how it works. There's a lot of other things that happen in the background, which we'll dive into. Like John showed, like any resource which already exists on your cluster will also be audited. Even if you do have enforced policies, by the way, Kyverno's kind of has enough intelligence to not try and bring down or block workloads which you've already deployed. So it will only flag things if there's a difference if there's a new violation you're introducing. But for existing violations, it will keep those in audit mode for existing workloads, right? So it's pretty safe. It's designed to be safe to introduce into existing clusters and incrementally apply your policies, right? But let's kind of take a look at this. So first of all, if I do check my Kyverno namespace, and just let's look at the deployments, right? So I want to show these are the 4 controllers. Admission controller, it receives every API request from the admission API server. Background controller is what does the scans. That's how we got our policy reports. Cleanup controller is one of our newer controllers. So Kyverno now can do cleanup policies. So you can actually put things like TTL on resources. You want to give somebody a temporary, kind of lease of something, you can. And Kyverno will automatically clean up. And there's a reports controller, which, generates the reports and for output itself. One thing to mention about the reporting API is this is not something just limited to Kyverno. We work with the policy working group, and this API is being proposed as a standard for Kubernetes. So any other scanner, any policy engine, any tool which wants to report something security related can utilize this report API, which we saw graphically in the policy reporter. And there's solutions like Nirmata or even Red Hat and others who have integrated with this as consumers of these API to show various things within your cluster. So let's go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's great. I like the idea that like people can use it and even contribute. And by the way, since I have the mic, hi Jared. I kind of know this guy. That face. I think I know that person. So thanks for listening, man.
It's a little familiar.
Yeah, a little bit.
All right. So one other thing I want to show, I know I mentioned Kyverno running inside the cluster, but was something else we did upfront, which just looking at when Kyverno was launched about 2 years ago or so, is we also built a CLI form factor, right? And the idea was you can then apply policies to any resource, even outside of Kubernetes, and that's very useful, especially if you want to check things in your CI pipelines. You want to either just even block a PR if some manifest violates your policies, right? So in this example, what I'm doing is the same policies that John installed through the Helm chart. I'm actually pulling through customize, and this is through a Git repo we manage where we have pod security policies. These policies match pod security standards. And just to quickly show for those of you who may not know, this is something, in about 2 or 3 releases ago in Kubernetes, as we kind of were transitioning from pod security policies to pod security admission. One of the good things that came out of it is pod security standards is now a published and versioned set of controls for every release of Kubernetes, right? And the best practices or the guidelines for what controls to manage are articulated in this in these standards. And there is, of course, through pod security admission, you can turn this on through labels, or you can use Kyverno policies to enforce that. And the policies that we installed are implementing each of these standards, and they change with every release of Kubernetes, right? There's some differences, additions, perhaps modifications, etc. So what I'm doing over here is I'm getting these pod security policies, and I'm applying a customization for enforce, but then piping it to the Kyverno, CLI, which can run as a kubectl plugin, and applying those policies to and just some YAML I created, before the demo, which is sitting in my temp folder, right? So I'm not in this case, applying anything to a cluster. I have no connection. The CLI doesn't talk to the cluster unless you tell it to. But here we were just able to apply policies on this YAML. And in fact, let's actually see. I don't recall if this YAML is a deployment or a pod. Let's kind of take a quick look. Okay, so it is a deployment, right? And these policies, like I mentioned, are written at the pod level. And what Kyverno automatically does is when it sees a pod policy, it says, well, I'm going to also translate these for pod controllers. You can turn this off, but there's a feature to automatically generate rules at the pod controller level. So the nice thing is, from a usability perspective, if somebody tries to, again have like a bad deployment, which is violating some pod security standards, they will immediately know. Now, if I want the same output in the policy report format, that's possible to do as well. I can just put a -p at the end, and now I'm getting a policy report, which could be YAML or JSON here, and it's showing me exactly what was wrong. And of course, if you just create a a bare pod without a security context, a lot of things are going to be flagged for each one of these, because it really wants you to have a security context, have run as non-root, and a few other things set in there, right? So very easy to do. And but if I want to download the CLI, and which is of course available also in Crew, and instead of now putting this against YAML, let's say I want to run it against my cluster, so I can do that as well. It will just scan, same policies are applying to my entire cluster. I'm running Minikube, so it's going to flag a lot of things again because I haven't hardened or secured the cluster. And I don't have any policies at this point in my cluster, but I'm just running through the CLI and applying all this, right? So if I do cpol as a short form for cluster policy, if I just do cpol -a, I don't have anything installed yet, right? So just thought I'd quickly show the CLI and how that works, because it's a pretty handy tool, and it's the easiest way to try out Kyverno even before you install it anywhere else.
Thanks for doing that. I'm a CLI person, so that was my happy moment.
Awesome. All right, so we can dive into a few different policies. The 2 or 3 areas I was thinking about. And one thing, I want to kind of mention about Kyverno, which is fairly unique too, is that the policies are not just for enforcing or validation. You can use policies to automate. So for that reason, I wanted to show like some use cases around multi-tenancy. We can talk about, supply chain security, image signing verification, and then also kind of look at some other, more advanced policies if, based on time and interest. But maybe just to complete the pod security things, right? Let's see what happens if I actually install these policies in enforce mode, which is what, John, you were asking about earlier too. So now instead of doing, kubectl Kyverno, let's just go and apply these. So we will, we'll say apply kubectl.
I think we're missing part of the your terminal.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, yeah.
Resized. So here now what I'm going to do is just apply, these directly into my cluster. And if you recall previously, I had like, no policies, but if I now do kubectl get cpol, I have a bunch of policies, about 15 or so. They're all running. Background is enabled, admission is enabled, and enforce is the action, right? Which is what we were kind of looking for. So now let me try and run that same Nginx YAML that we were applying the policies to, which was a deployment. So I'm going to just do that, and I see the same kind of violations, and it got blocked, right? So nothing ran because it denied that deployment from running because of these violations that need to be fixed. So very simple to turn things into enforce mode. You can also control that per namespace, right? So one common use case is, look, I'm not ready to enforce it across all my cluster, but I want to start enforcing it on certain namespaces, or better yet, I want to give exceptions to other namespaces. So you can do all of that, right? So it's very flexible in terms of how you manage, how you match exclude things, how you manage different policy enforcement per namespace, through your cluster or across your fleets of clusters.
So I do have a question for you, Jim, that just kind of pops to mind while you're describing how these pieces work. We at Kubefirst, we've historically been a very Terraform heavy shop. And we don't like to run Terraform as a command line tool. We leverage Atlantis to provide some governance around the Terraform changes that are happening. Atlantis is a tool that just kind of runs a plan on your behalf and then shows you the plan in your pull request. And then if the appropriate approvers approve the pull request, you can have Atlantis apply that Terraform change on your behalf and send the results of the apply to your pull request. And it's a really nice governance feature, particularly for production. We generally speaking, when you're talking about infrastructure as code and you're talking about governance of changes to that infrastructure as code, production is like the story that we all want to keep our guard up on, right? You would never want to have a process where an engineer maybe they're having a bad day, they run a Terraform plan, they don't notice that it's going to replace their production cluster or something like that. So Atlantis affords you that opportunity to have that auditability, the correct approvers as part of the workflow. Now, a lot of our community, as a result of Terraform switching to the BSL license recently, are a little bit nervous about continuing to buy in on Terraform. And Crossplane is a technology that we've kept our eye on for years. We love GitOps. We're a GitOps shop. And Crossplane fits the bill really well for us, just in terms of like GitOps-oriented discipline. It's great.
Yeah.
But the question that comes up when we talk about like perhaps using Crossplane to create production clusters
Mhm.
is, well, do you really want to trust that Crossplane is going to, like, if Crossplane decides for whatever reason, because of a bug in a provider or whatever else, if it decides that it needs to destroy your production cluster, it will. And that's fair. But it seems like with policy as code, you're able to perhaps put safeguards in place, and perhaps a relative, I don't want to assume that it'll be easy, but so far everything in Kyverno has been super frictionless. Is it easy to just like say, hey, as long as there's a particular label, as long as there's a particular whatever it is that makes a production cluster identifiable as production,
Mhm.
is there a way to set a policy that says nothing is allowed to destroy this until a particular annotation is removed or something like that?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So it's extremely simple to, so let's say you want to block any delete requests for certain namespaces, for certain resources. In this case, it would be a crossplane, a cluster resource. You
Mhm.
can easily do that, right? So, and you can also do that based on roles. You can do it based on, certain aspects of the policy. Let me kind of, just going back to how a policy works. This may be good to quickly walk through. So policies in Kyverno can match any resource, including cross-plane resources. I think I have I'll try and pull up a sample for how to do that and what that would look like. But once you match that resource, and when I say match a resource, I mean first by kind. But
Mhm.
then there's a lot of other conditions that you can also use to do a fine-grained check on whether that policy should apply. Labels being one of them. You could have,
Awesome.
any label in the resource or label in the namespace that it's being deployed to, which will be allowed to test and see, should I allow this particular operation, create an update, a delete, or even if you want to block like execs into a certain namespace or workload, you can, right? Because an exec is a connect request in an admission control sense. So you can write a policy to, check for that. In fact, by the way, any thing you're looking for, highly recommend folks go to Kyverno.io, look in our policy library. And if you just search over here, so let's say we were looking at, uh, trying to type in protect. Uh, okay. So name I had no idea if this policy actually existed, but it seems fairly close to what you're looking for.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry,
you're
Jim. Could I bother you to share screen one more time?
oh yeah, of
Yeah,
course. Let me forgot I had stopped sharing.
you beat me to it.
Okay. Yeah, what I was doing is I just went to Kyverno.io, clicked on the policies tab, right? And as I can see here, we have about 290 policies. There's more coming as we push our next release. But yeah, this is a great resource to go look for any policy. And just based on your question, I just typed in protect because I think I remember vaguely that there was something for label protection, label based protection. And what this policy is doing is it's protecting a namespace based on a particular label, right? So it's pretty much what you want and very easy to then adapt it to a specific other resources as you want, right? Same thing if you're looking for just cross-plane policies. One thing you can do is, if you search down here on the left, there's a bunch of other projects which we integrate with, and I don't see cross-plane here, but I know we have a lot of sample policies for cross-plane as well. Let me
Awesome.
just search, and I'll show one in a bit. Um, yeah, maybe these are some of the policies that are coming. But yeah, so let me in fact look for, yeah, so just this is a very simple policy which is just doing again a validation check on a pod. But what I will want to look for is, let's see what I have over here. Okay, so here's a policy for an S3 bucket, right? And again, just something you can create through Crossplane. This is just checking and making sure an S3 bucket, like it says, and it's in enforce mode. Um, there's a policy name, the resource it's going to match against this bucket, and then it's going to validate and make sure. So basically, here where we're running our Kyverno validation, it's checking for this pattern to say in the provider the region has to match the region we're specifying. Now, this could be completely data driven, could come from a config map, could come from some other variable you wish, but you can now manage that, right? So let's try and apply this actually through the CLI and see. I think I have a resource here too. Yeah, so I have an S3 bucket which should violate that policy.
Yep.
So let's see, is this, yeah, restrict regions, S3. Yeah, there. So we applied that policy. It checked for it and it says this location is not allowed. And this is again all customizable for your policies. But that's how you would apply a policy to a crossplane resource with Kyverno. And you can do this both in the management cluster as well as, of course, at admission controls or in your CI pipeline, right, like we were looking at with the CLI.
That's super cool.
That
So,
is.
now when let's say that I'm jumping in the deep end, I'm going all in on Kyverno, and I want policies across everything, across all my namespaces, across all my applications. What should I be thinking through in terms of policies versus cluster policies? And what should I be thinking about? Like, keep in mind that we're a GitOps shop. So every policy that we apply, we're always going to be applying by adding some YAML to some directory in some, so that it can show up in some namespace. But I'm not clear on what the best practices are in terms of organizing those policies and when they should be cluster policies and when they should be specific to a namespace. Can you give me a little bit of color in that regard?
Yeah, of course. So most commonly, folks would use cluster policies, but then you can match exclude namespaces either by labels, by name, by any other attribute that you wish, or you could even allow exceptions to be configured per namespace, right? And with Kyverno, a policy exception is also just, it's the same. It's kind of a resource here, which you can basically manage through GitOps as well. So the nice thing is not only your policies. Let me just search for policy exception. Seeing that over here, but we can pull it up on the doc side. You can also manage through your like GitOps, right? So people, so let's say you can have somebody, you can deploy a global policy, start with audit mode. When you're ready to turn it to enforce, you can create exceptions for certain, workloads within your cluster, right? So this is like, let's say this is an enforce policy. What this is showing is you have a policy exception resource, which is saying, I want specific, workloads and specific rules. So say, for example, that, Docker and Docker container you had, you could create a policy exception and say, I'm going to give you 30 days to clean that up. And then after that, it'll start showing the violation again, right? But going back to your question on Git policies at the cluster level or namespace level, most most would default to cluster level, but then in certain cases you can use namespace level policies if they only apply to a workload, right? So if it's very specific to a workload, to an application, there's nothing preventing you from creating namespace level policies,
Okay.
which are also managed there. The reports, by the way, let's see if we still if show up in the namespace as well, right? So if I do the policy reports here, what I'm seeing are my reports are actually in the namespace where the violations are. which is kind of cool because now a developer, you might only have access to that namespace, can actually see their violations in that namespace without having to kind of go and look in some tool or even look at the UI, right? And these violations also show up as events. So if you're looking at your cluster events, you will see as if new violations are found and things like that, right?
Yeah,
So
that was really eye opening to me when I was using Kyverno for the first time on our platform. I'm very familiar with the Argo CD user interface. It's how I navigate everything on the platform. You know, jumping around from application to application, looking at logs, looking at the state of pods. And with Kyverno installed on the platform, there's a couple additional reports that are popping off of every single pod, and you can inspect those reports and see, you know, exactly what it is that Kyverno is assessing about each one of the pods as they're provisioning. I thought that was a super neat integration. It was probably just by happenstance because Argo CD is surfacing everything in the namespace. So, but very good user experience in terms of understanding what Kyverno is doing to unrelated pods that Kyverno is managing, if that makes sense. So I thought it was, just a really nice architecture, the way that you're organizing the pieces to be discoverable. And what you were saying about developers having access to only certain namespaces, that's the same type of discipline that we're implementing at Kubefirst. So, you know, they would be able to see the policies that they violated in their development namespace, but the namespaces that are none of their concern, it's out of their face. It's a really nice design choice there.
Yeah, no, and certainly driven with a lot of community feedback and user input. So, and obviously, and Kyverno continues to evolve, right? So, happy to hear that. Yes, so one use case I want to show is, in addition to these validation policies, how Kyverno can also be used for, generating resources, and going back to the same use case about, namespace level access. You can kind of use Kyverno as a, multi-tenancy self-service namespace as a service type of system. So here I have some policies which, I'll install in a second. But just as an example, here's a policy which is at the cluster level. And what it's doing is it's matching any new namespace that's created, and it's generating a resource. By the way, I don't know if you noticed earlier, but help in Kyverno with VS Code is built in because it's Kyverno is I have my Kubernetes plugin, which is getting the CRDs, so you can get kind of built-in help, which I always think is pretty cool. Sometimes you want to understand what a field does, etc.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, but here, what we're doing is we're generating a network policy, which is default denies, so just denies everything for any new namespace that's created. But you can similarly add things like limit ranges. You can add, even like with this, I have, rules set up to generate a fine-grained, uh, here we're creating a cluster role and cluster role binding for that particular user who requested that namespace. So only they can delete that namespace, others cannot see or delete, right? So a few different policies here. And by the way, all these samples are online, or just if you can't find something, you can reach out on Slack. But let's install these policies and kind of try them out, right, to see um, how that works. So this is in the multi-tenancy folder, and we want to kind of just install all the policies here. So, okay, so yeah, these role bindings already exist, so that's fine. Then it should have, installed my policies. So let's check those. All right, so all the policies are ready. So now what I want to do, as an admin, of course, I can still do, and these policies were written to exclude admin for certain things, right? So If I create a namespace, it'll be fine. But what I also did as part of this is we added 2 roles, right? So there's 2 users. Um, they're just named Ned and Nancy, who are like these namespace admins that we want to allow into our system, right? So if I kind of do now, let's say I want to create a namespace. I'm going to call it whatever, let's say team A, and I'm going to say as Nancy, right? Um, so for this user, oops, of course you can't do that. So let's go to team 1. What Kyverno comes back and says is, hey, you're allowed to create a namespace. So I didn't complain about that, but it's saying, we have a policy, your namespaces have to be small, medium, large, right? And it's just something, again, it came up with for the demo, but you can with Kyverno now, it's enforcing, those labels where it's saying, if you are creating a namespace, I want you to give me a label for the sizing, right? And this could be whatever you wish, but we've just kind of done small, medium, large, and we'll have quotas assigned with those. So let's kind of abide by that, and we say I want to now create my namespace, or so I'm gonna do just go with the resources, and I'm gonna create that again as the same user that I was using before, right? So now team 1 got created, and if I try and do let's say get namespace, or let's do -n team 1, and I'm going to get my network policy, I can, because I'm the namespace admin. I want to do, let's say, get quota or get all. I should be able to do that too. So all of that, kind of works because I own the namespace. But if I try to do that as a different user, which is Ned, I can't, right? I'm forbidden from doing that because it created a role and role binding where only, this user has access to that namespace, and this user is also allowed. If I also do, let's say, just as admin, I want to now kind of do, get, let's say, role in your, or role binding. I should see a role binding created to give me admin permissions, to give Nancy admin permissions to that namespace, right? So with this, we have with a simple policy now automated a bunch of things which are otherwise, fairly manual, fairly cumbersome to do. And that's super handy, right? And one question we often get when we demo this is, hey, but isn't with GitOps, and like you mentioned, you're a GitOps shop, the thinking is everything should go through Git. Isn't this sort of violating that? And the way we kind of think of that is, first off, both Flux and Argo CD now have ability to handle server-side applies. So mutate policies work well if you enable the right settings in those. And even with things like generate policies, there are certain things you want to react to quickly inside the cluster itself. And if you think of it as in Kubernetes or with cloud native patterns, it's all about control loops, right? And GitOps is certainly one level of control loop, but much like that, admission control or policy engines like Kyverno can also be a control loop, right? So if you recall, if I said get netpol as Nancy. So now, because I have admin permissions, let's try something. Let's delete this, right? And see, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, but I think it'll work. But what I would expect to happen is even if that command works, um, so we have to, of course, give the name, that Kyverno will recreate that right away, right? So I did a delete, I got it, and there you go. It's recreated much like a GitOps controller would do.
Yeah, super neat. I think about. I wish I had this in a prior life. You think about an environment where you're on a platform engineering team and you're trying to build out self-service developer ecosystems, right? And maybe you work in a medium to large size enterprise, and you just have teams everywhere. All these development teams, and they're all building things, and you want them to be self-service. You don't want to hold their hand through every single microservice onboarding onto the cluster. But you do have rules as a platform engineer. You have rules about what should be allowed, what you want to enforce, what you want to disallow. And it seems like this is just the answer to that problem, because without something like this, I can have all the rules that I want, but if there's not an engine enforcing it, then it requires that meeting, that contract. I have to be involved in the review of that pull request that onboards an application onto the platform. But if you're trying to go full self-service and you can encapsulate those rules that you're trying to enforce through a pull request review of some GitOps stuff, and instead can have that at that lower level inside the Kubernetes cluster, enforcing what's allowed and what's disallowed, and allow that to truly be a self-service operation from the developer team. And if they try to do something that's out of bounds, it's prevented from doing so. And only then do they maybe read the report and figure out what to do to adjust, or at that point they can reach out to you and see what they need to do to adjust it or whatever. But man, would that have been valuable to me 1 shop ago, 2 shops ago, 3 shops ago. I know all the apps that are coming into Kubefirst, so it's not that big a deal for me anymore. But man, if I was in an enterprise type shop, that would be just enormous to me. So yeah, super cool stuff. And just kind of thinking out loud a little further, like, stuff that you want to organize within and have as a standard policy across your organization, so that things like your telemetry boards are always good, or so that things like your CI metadata is always hydrating your dashboards correctly. Like that's the type of stuff where, like, if you need to know, if you just wish that every single deployment had a team label associated with it, you can just say that you need that now. And as a platform engineer, it's going to put a little extra burden on your development team. They have to know that. They have to add that label to their deployment. But you're able to self-service establish what the rules are and let go, which is just super powerful to me. So
yeah, so just go, so I just typed in require labels and there's your policy. Right?
There it is.
Yeah.
Love it.
So yeah, I mean, it's certainly that's exactly what we had in mind as we design and build and continue to grow Kyverno. It's a tool for platform engineering, right? It lets you does security, automation, compliance, but best practices and automation are a key part of it, which is very different than any other security tool, right? Because most often we think of security as this, analyze or scan, analyze, and report type of tools. Here we want to automate security concerns because as platform engineers, that's what we do, right? You want to automate everything, so why not automate security?
So true. Yeah. So cool.
Yeah. So one last example I want to show. This is getting into a slightly more complex policy, but I think it'll be fun to show.
Let's do it.
Is on software supply chain security, right? And that's somewhat of a buzzword where everybody talks about it these ways, and everyone kind of thinks of it slightly differently. But here, what we're going to show is just how you can sign and verify images. So I have this demo repo. I was using a Java application, just kind of more enterprise type application here, which actually had some log4j vulnerabilities and things like that into it. But really a very simple pipeline here in just GitHub Actions to build the image, then run a scan, and I'm using Trivy as my scanner. I'm using SIF to generate an SBOM, and then I'm signing the image. I'm also signing both the scan report and the SBOM, and attaching that to the image in my OCI registry as attestations, right? So all of this, like if I go, let's kind of look at, so this is the scan step. Actually, we can also check the attestation. So here we're using Cosign. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Cosign, Cosign is another Linux Foundation. It's a part of Sigstore, which is a organization in the Linux Foundation. And what it can be used for is signing and verification for pretty much anything, right? And it's got some very cool features. Here, what I'm doing with it is I'm signing, and I'm using what Cosign calls keyless signing. which means it's going to create an identity with OIDC. It integrates with GitHub as well as GitLab and several other tools. So it'll generate temporary keys, sign my image, and then during verification, it checks a transparency log to make sure the keys were actually, the right keys, they were generated at the right time, and it correlates all of that. So very kind of nice workflow. But basically, here what I'm getting is it's signing my image, it's pushing it back to the registry, and then it's also signing some other attestations, fancy word for some metadata I want to attach to my image, and then verify that metadata before I allow my image to run, right? So let's kind of switch to some policies which we'll see, for that, right? So this policy, and I'll kind of explain what it does, and then we'll look at it in action. So this is checking for signatures and attestations. It also is loading from your cluster a map called known vulnerabilities, right? And this config map here is, I'm using it as a very simple system to say, okay, here are some allowed, and we all know that, look, every image that we deploy will either, there'll be new vulnerabilities, or there might be others that pop up. Some may be impactful, others you might want to allow, again, exceptions for. So here, the way I'm doing it is I'm creating this config map called known vulnerabilities. And if I look at it, it's a very simple config map. It says for which version, these are the CVEs I have allowed. And you can, kind of annotate these. You can say why. You can manage this through GitOps too, right? So you have full
Yep.
audit trail on that. But the nice thing there is now I'm loading this config map. I'm saying check everything, make sure it's signed with my keyless, my actual GitHub, action, which is generating this. I can even check, by the way, which branch this got created from, things like that. But then I want to check for some attestations. I want my every image to have an SBOM. I want it to have some provenance data, and I'm gonna go a little bit deeper into my scan report from Trivi and make sure that scan report is not older than 72 hours, and it doesn't have any critical or high severity vulnerabilities which are not in that map we just looked at, right? So if it finds any of these new ones, they should either be in the map, or I guess shouldn't exist in the report itself, right? So fairly, and this, by the way, this language we're using here is JamesPath. So it's not something that Kyverno came up with. We use JamesPath, which is fairly, if you're familiar with the, it works with AWS CLIs and several other CLIs also use JamesPath. It's a very fast and efficient way of processing JSON data, which is what our internal format is, right? So that's what is going on. So let's try and you know check a few things. I'm going to go ahead and delete the multi-tenancy policies. We'll just install this particular policy. Um, so here I want to do image verification, check attestation. So I created that policy. And now if I do kubectl run, and let's start with an older Tomcat image, which I don't have in my known. So I have that config map installed as well. So it's going to pull that, and so first of all, it's telling me, hey, your scan report on that image is pretty old, so I'm not going to allow it, right? So it blocked it because of that Trivi scan report. Let's go ahead and relax that and see what happens, right? And we'll just for this example, I'll go in here, I'll add a couple of zeros at the end of the period. Yeah, which is not what you would want to do in any real system. But so, all right, we configured the policy again. We are running that same older image. So I'm pretty sure the scan report is newer than that. So sure enough, now it's telling us something different. It's saying, hey, the scan report's fine, but I found all these new vulnerabilities in your scan report, which are not in that config map, right? So it's not going to allow that particular image as well. But if I go ahead and now do one of my newer images, so I think I have 41 and 42, it now should allow the scan, both checks should pass, and it should allow that in that pod. I did a dry run, but otherwise the pod would be allowed, right? So quick example of how you can obviously Kyverno is designed so you can start very simple, and basic policies are extremely simple, but it's also very powerful, especially once you start combining some of these policies. Like you can even generate cleanup policies. You can generate you can use Kyverno, by the way, to generate policies also if you wish. But there's some very interesting use cases that are emerging and folks in the community have done, and it's extremely once you understand this JMSPAT syntax a little bit, it's fairly straightforward to build, test, and run these complex policies as well.
Man, that's really cool.
John, I'm gonna start to use Kyverno and add policies for everything and anything.
I know. I'm right there with you, Fred. It's reasonable to think that it's going to end up as a part of our core platform instead of a GitOps catalog add-on. I found it to be just beyond frictionless and valuable, which is the two of the main core tenets of Kubefirst. We want to be frictionless, fast, and valuable, and you hit the nail on the head on all three of those fronts.
And the delivering to the users like a more secure cluster with best practices already in place, with like no overhead in terms of like resources. I mean, like you were doing the demo, Jim, and I was thinking like I need to talk to John after, because I think it should be like part of the core platform. But like I don't want to say this live because I don't want to set expectation. And like John, the first thing you said, like,
boom,
yeah, what?
I know, I really do. I mean, policy as code isn't going anywhere. Shifting some of those decision-making entities into a scientific form and shifting it left, so that your developer at the pull request, when it's trying to get into the cluster, that's when the conversation starts. It's just the right way to do policy. Every policy is not the same. That's the tough part with Kubefirst. So, you take Kubefirst to company X, and they may only have a couple things that they need out of policy. You take Kubefirst to company Y, that's very high compliance, some kind of FedRAMP environment or something like that, and you're going to have a lot of policies. You're going to need full-time policy engineers that are working through, making everything organized the way that your enterprise organization needs it organized. But at the end of the day, all of it, no matter how small or big you are, is better than needing to have a human, conversation at every single entry of code into your cluster, because that is not scalable. And the way that Kyverno has gone about making the introduction of Kyverno into the cluster very safe and very non-imposing on live running applications that you have in your cluster is really, really sharp to organize it that way. If anybody viewing ever wanted to check out Kyverno and didn't want to check it out in their live environment, obviously we showed right when we started the live stream today that you can run a Kubefirst K3D cluster. It'll come with HashiCorp Vault, Argo CD, Argo workflows, GitHub runners, or GitLab runners, depending on what kind of Git shop you are. It'll have sample applications that build containers, build charts, deliver charts to a development, staging, production environment. So you get this really rich environment on your local host that's not going to impact anyone in your company. And then you can just boop and add Kyverno to it. And then as Jim was showing us today, you can go to the Kyverno website, grab a whole bunch of policies, and just start messing with a very complex enterprise-like environment on your local host. And it doesn't matter if you break everything. You can just throw the whole thing away, and in 6 minutes, you'll have a completely replaced K3D cluster with all those same tools, and you can try again or do whatever you want. So I think we've got some nice magic between Kubefirst and Kyverno. Jim, is really, really awesome having you hop in and demo a little bit of the more advanced features. I've truly just not had enough time to dive in deep the way that you're organizing the architecture so that it is GitOps friendly, so that you can just drop policies into a directory, so that you're managing your policies right there in the Kyverno namespace, cluster-wide policies. It seems like it would be really easy to add that to a Kubefirst platform. So to all of our viewers that are interested in policy as code, I really do want to say sincerely that firsthand, I found it to be beyond frictionless, super easy, and very much worthwhile to start digging into. So yeah, thank you so much for coming in and demoing some of the cool tricks today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. And by the way, Frank, who is the, I guess he's the creator of both the Kyverno Playground as well as the Policy Reporter tool you showed, just added a note in chat, right? So there is a playground which you can use to just quickly try out also Kyverno and test policies. The CLI that we showed also can be used for testing policies. So lots of other things. Just feel free to drop by the Kyverno Slack or find us on the Kubernetes community Slack.
Awesome.
Awesome, man. If Jared is still watching the live stream and got as excited about Kyverno that John and I, not in that release, Jared. Not in that release. We have already too much on our plate. So please, but soon should be there. So, but not in this release.
That's right. That's right. Nothing is stopping 2.3.0 from getting out the door. There are no new additions.
The guy who's not even PM is not like, no, it's not gonna happen. Like, I need to do that. I need to do that. We get too excited about stuff sometimes. So before we go, we've shown you how to use Kubefirst today. It was on Key 3D, so that's a local experience. John was talking a little bit about that, but like it's available in other clouds, so you can use Kubefirst on AWS, Civo, and we have in beta right now DigitalOcean, Vultr, and Google Cloud. And you can use the Git provider of your choice, so GitHub or GitLab SaaS. So if you want to try it again, please. Sorry, I'm laughing because Jared's like, yeah, I'll wait until the next release. So good, awesome. He was listening too, which is great. So yeah, if you want to try Kubefirst, go ahead. It's open source, it's available, it's out there, and it's also another great way, in addition to the playground, if you want to test on a cluster to Kyverno, you're good to go. If you want to have more information, go on github.com/Kubefirst or docs.kubefirst.io. If you have any issue with either Kubefirst or the documentation, have suggestion, feature, want to talk about something, don't understand something is not clear, you're not sure what you read or whatever, like any possible question or anything, issues you have, let us know. We like to think we're friendly people, and I think we are. So join our Slack community on kubefirst.io/Slack. And obviously there is the website at kubefirst.io. And obviously, actually, yeah, Kyverno.io/policies is like a place that is quite exciting to me. So I'm probably going to spend some time to check a little bit the policies that are available out there. But like obviously the website, Kyverno.io, and it's on GitHub too. So it's open source. If you go on github.com/Kyverno/Kyverno, this is the place to be. So again, thanks for being our guest, Jim. Any last word about whatever you want to last word about?
No, I think you gave all the right links. So we are a CNCF project. We do have regular community meetings. Would love to hear from folks on things. We are, of course, going to be at KubeCon in a few weeks at the Kyverno booth, also at the Nirmata booth, and have some exciting announcements tying back to what you mentioned, John, about Terraform. So stay tuned.
Very neat.
Meet us at KubeCon.
We'll look forward to that for sure.
All right.
And speaking of KubeCon, we're going to be there also. So, and probably soon we're going to announce, give you a little more details about like what's our booth and who's going to be there. So please come talk to us. And we're always happy to meet people in person, discuss about cloud native Kubernetes, or you know what, whatever tech you want to talk about, or just talking about coffee or cats or whatever. Like, we're just, as I said, friendly people. So we're going to be more than happy to meet people in person. And with that said, gentlemen, do you know what's
Ooh.
the object-oriented way to become wealthy?
The object-oriented way to become wealthy. Let's hear it, Fred. What is it?
Inheritance.
Yes, Jim. Yes, that is.
I had to think about that.
Every time that I made those like bad developer joke, you're the first one who got the answer. So congratulations. And usually what I'm going to do instead of that, because nobody get the answer and like the joke is always like borderline funny-ish. It's like, so I still needed to do the bottom. So on that note, thanks again, Jim, for being here. Like, seriously, I echo everything that John said. Product is amazing. Really impressed about it. And I cannot believe I did not know about it until like now. So super happy we had that live stream. Everybody that joined today, you were a little bit silent. I think we're just like so mesmerized with like all the nice feature that Jim was sharing, and like all the capabilities that like we're just like, oh my god, that's amazing, that's amazing. But like, if you have any question, Jim said it before, they're in the CNCF and the Kubernetes Slack. They have a channel, Kyverno, or you can even ask us questions on our Slack channel, and we're going to be able to relay the information if we don't know the answer. But thanks for joining. Thanks for watching, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks, folks.